Hi, everyone. Good to be able to communicate, albeit from this distance. Certainly very tiresome. Professionally, to try and see all of you in this way, or to be seen by all of you in this way. And it's really especially true when we are struggling. We ought to be struggling. We ought to feel the pain of the fracture of our community, our country, society in so many ways. And that pain was really on full display again this week. And to be frank, a video or even a drasha to get into detail and to talk in earnest in great depth about what's transpiring, just this medium is insufficient. And I really want to extend an offer to everyone. Please call me at the office, call me on my cell phone, email me. I'd be more than happy to discuss the events surrounding this great country. And I'll leave it at this, that one comment about how a house divided cannot stand. Frankly, many different messages or lessons from Lincoln, President Lincoln, are quite appropriate. And perhaps on this week's Federation Community Unity Call that's taking place, we'll talk about the power of unity and coming together. But it's a painful time. It's a painful time to be an American. Relatedly, but unrelatedly, is a drasha, a message on leadership. On the one hand, we're learning the Parsha. We're connecting to the Parsha. On the other hand, we have great concept of leadership given to us in Parshas Vayera. Thinking about Moshe, you see what Moshe says as he so humbly responds to Hashem that he's less than worthy. Eich yishma elai. How is Paro going to listen to me? I am defective. I lack ability. Ani aral sefasayim. My speech negatively impacted by certain shortcomings, physical shortcomings. Hashem says to Moshe, you're going to have a spokesperson. In the very next verse, you're going to have Aaron Hanavi. He's going to help you, provide for you, assist you in these endeavors. Now, I want to share with you the teaching of the Ran. The Ran, one of the Rishonim from the Middle Ages. The Ran lived in the 14th century and one of the most important commentaries in our history. Drashos Ran on the Parshios, very important commentary. And he is taken with this exchange between Hashem and Moshe, this communication. And he wants to point us to Nedarim. Rabbi Yonasan teaches us from Tractate Nedarim that Hashem rests upon a person, a prophet, and causes his Shekhinah, his divine presence, to be with only those who are wise, those who are strong, the usher, the wealthy man, the anav, the humble man or woman, And Moshe, it says, as part of the quote of the teaching of Rabbi Yonason, serves as the prime example, primordial example, including all of these criteria. And the Ran says this is great. We know some of the prerequisites to be a prophet, to be the ultimate prophet. And he says, the Ran says, I understand why somebody has to be wise. He says, I understand why somebody has to be humble. You need to have brains, you need to have an intellect, you need to be able to decipher and analyze. But he says, of course, a person needs to know that there is a lot out there that they're not familiar with. They need to have humility. He says that certainly makes a lot of sense. And in Judaism, the ultimate level, beyond being an intellect and a scholar, is prophecy. How do you become the ultimate leader? Who are our ultimate leaders in history? They're prophets, Nevi'im. And here he says, but strength and wealth? Why do you need to have strength and wealth? He says, if you need to have a physical presence. Moshe had this speech impediment. He said, look at Moshe, you can have a lisp, you can be a great Navi. So the Ran raises a very important question. And he has a very long answer. I want to share with you for reflection over the Shabbos as we engage with Parshas Vayera, some of the highlights of this message. So he explains that, a person who is really into physicality, it's hard for them to have this relationship or this connection to the divine. He says, we learn this from Yaakov and what was represented in the dream of the ladder, in Yaakov's dream. And he says, ultimately, a Jewish prophet, when trying to understand leadership, if they're so connected to materialism, it's really hard for them to have that level of inspiration required to be a prophet. And he's setting up this question, this conundrum of why strength and wealth are really required at all. And he explains that a person needs to be strong. A person needs to be imposing in a sense, so they're not fearful. You can't be afraid. As Moshe was not allowed to be afraid. What was standing in front of it was very daunting. And you need to be of great courage because there will be many pitfalls, many adversaries, many challengers along the way. Look at Moshe. Look at many of our Nevi'im. They certainly faced that. And this is a major part of Parshas Vayera as we see Moshe's development as a leader and everything that stood in front of him and all the obstacles that Moshe references explicitly. So in that way, we can understand strength. But what about wealth? Is having a lot of money really going to help you? And, again, the core of the question is that why should physicality be so important? If anything, we see that Moshe had these challenges in terms of his physiology. And so he helps us answer these questions, and he talks specifically about wealth. And he says Moshe's message was so important. And for Moshe to be wealthy was very important because the Jewish people, 3 million people, each one of them had a different makeup, different chemical makeup. They were all motivated by different matters. Some people loved wisdom. Some people loved gevura, loved physical strength. But you also had some people that loved wealth. And sure, you and I could say that, people love wealth, That's their problem. It's their shortcoming. Let them come around to understand what's really important in life. And if they miss out on the message, that's fine. But Hashem says, you know what? When it comes to Nevuah, and in our context, when it comes to Moshe Rabbeinu, and the messages that he was bringing, have hope, monotheism, stay strong, maintain your identity. So Hashem said, I don't want anybody to be left behind. And when it comes to prophecy, I don't want anybody to say, the leader didn't really speak to me. That can't be an out. That can't be an excuse. So the Ran suggests that Moshe was meant to be able to relate to people who had wealth, who are focused on wealth. And regardless of whether or not these wealthy people were sincere, we had to give them the best possibility of being successful with regards to living this prophecy, being a part of the Jewish people. And so Moshe needed to be able to relate and be relatable to all different kinds of people, including that category of those who were into money, into silver and gold. And so being wealthy is also considered to be an important part. Be independent, to be strong. I would suggest to be financially independent and how important that is. But the Ran says that in order to be able to relate to all these different kinds of people, these are considered to be critical traits, which is not necessarily something which is easily intuited. And that's what the Ran suggests. With regards to the shortcomings, with regards to the speech impediment, what the Ran has to say about this is that Moshe was the prophet of all prophets. Moshe was supernatural. And while on some level, naturally speaking, a prophet needs to be able to have a certain level of perfection. No person is perfect, but have a certain level of perfection. Moshe, everything about Moshe was a miracle. Everything was beyond the norm. And part of the miracle is that he could have this lisp and this speech impediment and still reach the upper echelons, the highest level that a human being could reach. That's one of our fundamental beliefs, that Moshe reached that level. And one of the reasons why that's so important, perhaps my favorite part of the Ran's message to us, is that the Ran says Judaism is so important. Torah is so important. It would be a pagam. It would be a stain on our history, a stain on our ideology, a stain on our philosophy if Moshe was suave, if he was a person, because our whole faith is based on Moshe to a great extent. And if Moshe was somebody who was extremely eloquent, was slick with his tongue, was somebody who quick on his toes, was this great spokesman, then perhaps the Ran suggests people would be taken with Moshe and how dynamic he was and how effective he was as a speaker, as opposed to the truth, the ideology he was representing. If they'd be mesmerized by him, but not Torah and not Hashem, that would cause issues. The Torah needs to be based on truth, not based on the dramatics around it. A good shiur, ideally speaking, is a good class, a good lecture, is based not on how dynamic and exciting and engaging and entertaining the lecturer is, but rather it's based on the truth, on the power of the idea within the communication. And so what Moshe had to offer was absolutely not this great ability to communicate with eloquence. On the contrary, there was an issue with that. And Hashem made it this way because the prophecy of Moshe, upon which so much rests, needed to be the awesomeness of the idea, the awesomeness of the concept, the awesomeness of the truth there. And that's why, as the Ran explains, his stammering, his stuttering was actually a positive, so that the power of the idea of Judaism, the power of the idea of Torah, could be most prominent, as opposed to any kind of excellent communication skills and the like. And so we've addressed how, beginning of chapter 7 and in Parshas Vayera, we've discussed how Moshe is hesitant and he recognizes his own, in a sense, deformity, if you will, how that really is a positive, and what are the prerequisites in the general sense, as taught in the Gemara, about a prophet in general, and why those are all relevant. And Yehi Ratzon, be Hashem's will, we recognize that Hashem runs the world, and who would have thought that Moshe was the one, with all of these imperfections, that he would be the one to, in this Sedra and in many of the weeks to come, many of the Parshios, that Moshe Rabbeinu would be the one, with all of his shortcomings, would be the one to be the most important Jew of all time. Because ultimately we realize Hashem runs the world, and the message and the messenger, to a great extent, Hashem knows what he's doing. And you can imagine if you and I were there with our ancestors going through this slavery, and we were going to say, you know, how can we have hope? We have this leader, but this leader is our spokesperson. How is this going to work? But ultimately, just like today, when we sometimes struggle to understand the world that we live in, at some point, at some level, we put our faith, we have bitachon in the Almighty and the Master of the universe. Thank you all. Have a wonderful Shabbos, and please do be in touch. Best regards to everyone.